The cameras had stopped rolling for the day, but nobody knew what Charlie Sheen had been hiding in his dressing room for 3 years. What security found that Tuesday afternoon would shake Hollywood to its core. It was just another ordinary day on the 2.5 Men set in Burbank. The crew was packing up after wrapping episode 14 of season 7. Charlie had delivered his lines flawlessly as always, cracking jokes between takes and keeping everyone entertained. But as the last light dimmed and the soundstage fell quiet, Charlie did something he'd been doing for months, something nobody suspected. He walked to his dressing room, locked the door behind him, and pulled out a leather-bound journal from behind a loose panel in the wall. What Charlie wrote in that diary would later be discovered by accident. And when it was, it revealed a side of the actor that nobody, not his co-stars, not the producers, not even his closest friends, had ever imagined. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to that fateful Tuesday. Charlie had been acting strange all week. Jon Cryer noticed it first during Monday's table read. He seemed distant, Jon would later recall in an interview. Like his mind was somewhere else entirely. Angus T. Jones, who played his nephew Jake on the show, mentioned that Charlie had been unusually quiet during lunch breaks. Even the writers picked up on his odd behavior. Charlie was always the life of the party on set, said one anonymous crew member. But that week, he'd disappear the moment we called cut. We figured maybe he was dealing with some personal stuff. They had no idea how right they were. The discovery happened purely by chance. A maintenance worker was checking the electrical systems in the dressing rooms when he noticed something odd about Charlie's wall. A panel seemed loose, and when he pushed it, it swung open like a secret door. Behind it was a small cavity containing several items, but it was the journal that would change everything. What happened next shocked everyone involved. The maintenance worker, thinking he'd found something important, immediately called security. Within minutes, the head of studio security, the show's executive producer, and eventually Chuck Lorre himself were crowded into Charlie's dressing room, staring at the contents of that hidden compartment. Nobody was prepared for what they found written in those pages. The diary wasn't what you'd expect from Charlie Sheen. It wasn't filled with stories about wild parties or Hollywood excess. Instead, it contained something far more profound and heartbreaking: the raw, unfiltered thoughts of a man struggling with the weight of his own success and the pressure of living up to an image that was slowly destroying him from the inside. Entry after entry revealed Charlie's deep fears about his career, his relationships, and his future. He wrote about feeling trapped by his own persona, worried that people only saw him as the character he played rather than the person he really was underneath it all. March 15th, another day pretending to be someone I'm not, read one entry that would later be leaked to the press. Everyone expects me to be this guy who has it all figured out, but the truth is, I'm scared as hell most of the time. What happens when they realize I'm just making it up as I go along? The entries became more revealing as they continued. Charlie wrote about his struggles with addiction, not in the glorifying way the media often portrayed them, but with genuine remorse and fear. He described nights when he couldn't sleep, wondering if he'd wake up the next morning. He wrote about wanting to get clean but being terrified of who he might become without the substances that had become such a part of his identity. But perhaps most shocking of all were his entries about his relationships with his co-workers and friends. Charlie had written extensively about Jon Cryer, describing him as the brother I never had, but was too proud to admit I needed. He wrote about how grateful he was to work alongside someone who never judged him, even when he showed up to set hungover or unprepared. Jon keeps me grounded, one entry read. He doesn't know it, but just having him there makes me feel like maybe I'm not completely lost. Sometimes I catch him looking at me with this expression, not judgment, just concern, and it makes me want to be better. The diary also revealed Charlie's complicated relationship with Chuck Lorre, while their public feud would later make headlines around the world. The journal showed that Charlie actually respected Chuck deeply, and was frustrated with himself for not being able to live up to what he saw as Chuck's vision for the show. Chuck sees something in me that I can't see in myself, he wrote. I know I'm letting him down, but I don't know how to stop. It's like I'm on this runaway train and everyone's watching me crash in slow motion, but nobody knows how to hit the brakes. The most devastating entries, however, were about his children. Page after page revealed a father desperate to break the cycle of dysfunction that had plagued his own childhood, but terrified that he was destined to repeat his father's mistakes. "I look at my girls and I see everything good in the world," one entry began. "They deserve so much better than what I'm giving them. They deserve a father who has his act together, who can show them what it means to be strong without being destructive. Instead, they're watching me fall apart piece by piece, and I don't know how to stop it." As word of the diary's discovery spread through the studio, reactions were mixed. Some executives worried about potential legal ramifications if the contents became public. Others were moved by the raw honesty of Charlie's words and wanted to help him get the support he needed. Chuck Lorre found himself in an impossible position. As he read through the entries, many of which mentioned him directly, he began to understand the depth of Charlie's struggles in a way he never had before. The man he'd been working with for years wasn't just the confident, sometimes difficult actor he thought he knew. He was someone crying out for help in the only way he knew how. "Reading those pages changed everything for me," Chuck would later say in a rare interview about the incident. "I realized we'd all been so focused on managing Charlie's behavior that we'd missed the person underneath it all. Here was someone in genuine pain, documenting his struggles in the only safe space he had." But the story doesn't end there. What happened next would determine not just Charlie's future, but the fate of one of television's biggest hits. The studio executives called an emergency meeting. The question on everyone's mind was simple, but loaded with implications. What do you do when you discover that your biggest star has been secretly documenting his own breakdown? Some argued that the diary should remain private, that publishing or discussing its contents would be a violation of Charlie's privacy, and could potentially harm the show's reputation. Others believed that the revelations could actually help Charlie by forcing him to confront his demons and seek the help he clearly needed. Chuck Lorre made the decision that would change everything. Instead of keeping the diary secret or using it against Charlie, he chose to approach the actor directly. The confrontation that followed would become the stuff of Hollywood legend. "Charlie," Chuck said when he called the actor into his office the next morning, "we need to talk." Charlie walked into that meeting expecting to discuss scripts or scheduling. He had no idea that his most private thoughts were about to become the subject of the most important conversation of his career. When Chuck placed the leather journal on his desk, Charlie's face went white. For a moment, neither man spoke. The weight of 3 years' worth of secrets hung in the air between them like a storm cloud waiting to break. "How long have you known?" Charlie finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Since yesterday afternoon," Chuck replied. "Charlie, why didn't you ever tell us how much you were struggling?" What followed was a conversation that both men would later describe as one of the most honest and difficult discussions of their lives. Charlie broke down and admitted to feeling completely overwhelmed by the pressure of carrying such a successful show while dealing with his personal demons. He talked about his fear of disappointing people and his belief that asking for help would be seen as weakness. Chuck, meanwhile, expressed his regret at not recognizing the signs earlier, and his commitment to finding a way to support Charlie while protecting the show and its cast and crew. The meeting lasted nearly 4 hours. By the end, both men had tears in their eyes and a plan that nobody could have predicted. Instead of firing Charlie or trying to cover up the diary's existence, Chuck proposed something radical. They would work together to address Charlie's issues head-on, using the show's platform to tell stories that might help not just Charlie, but viewers who were struggling with similar problems. "The diary showed me that Charlie had incredible insight into his own struggles," Chuck explained. "I thought, what if we could channel that honesty into the show? What if we could find a way to tell stories that were both entertaining and genuinely helpful?" Charlie was initially resistant to the idea. The thought of incorporating his real struggles into his fictional character felt too exposing, too risky. But as they talked through the possibilities, he began to see the potential for something truly meaningful. "Maybe this is why I kept that diary in the first place," Charlie said during one of their planning sessions. "Maybe I was documenting all this stuff because somewhere deep down, I knew it needed to come out eventually." The plan they developed was ambitious and unprecedented. Without directly referencing the diary or Charlie's real-life struggles, they would begin incorporating storylines that dealt with addiction, mental health, and the pressure of maintaining a public persona while dealing with private pain. The first episode to reflect this new direction, Aired 6 weeks after the diary's discovery. Viewers noticed immediately that something had changed. Charlie's character seemed more vulnerable, more real. The jokes were still there, but they carried a weight that hadn't been present before. Critics praised the show's new emotional depth, but they had no idea about the real story behind the evolution. Only a handful of people knew about the diary and the profound impact its discovery had on everyone involved with the show. Charlie himself seemed transformed by the experience. Co-workers noticed that he was more present on set, more engaged with the material, and more open about his own struggles. The man who had hidden his journal behind a wall for 3 years was finally ready to let people see who he really was. It was like watching someone come back to life, Jon Cryer later reflected. Charlie had been going through the motions for so long that I think we'd all forgotten how brilliant he could be when he was fully present. The diary changed that. But perhaps the most significant change was in Charlie's relationship with his own story. For years, he'd been running from his problems, using humor and bravado to deflect any serious discussion of his struggles. The diary had forced him to confront his demons in writing, and now he was ready to face them in real life. He began attending regular therapy sessions, something he'd always resisted before. He started being more honest with his friends and family about his struggles. Most importantly, he began to see his addiction and mental health issues not as character flaws to be hidden, but as challenges to be managed with support and professional help. The discovery of Charlie Sheen's secret diary would remain one of Hollywood's best-kept secrets for years. But its impact on the man himself, and on one of television's most beloved shows, was undeniable. Looking back, it's clear that finding that journal was a turning point, not just for Charlie, but for everyone who cared about him. Sometimes the things we hide from the world are exactly what we need to share in order to heal. And sometimes, the most profound discoveries happen in the most unexpected places, like behind a loose panel in a dressing room wall, where a broken man had been documenting his journey back to wholeness. One honest page at a time, the story of that diary and its discovery remains a testament to the power of honesty, vulnerability, and the courage it takes to let people see who we really are behind the masks we wear. But there's more to this story, details that have never been shared publicly. Until now, the maintenance worker who first discovered the diary, a man named Roberto Martinez who had worked at the studio for over 15 years, later revealed that he almost didn't report the finding. "I thought about just putting everything back and pretending I never saw it," Roberto admitted in a rare interview years later. "Charlie had always been good to the crew, always remembered our names, asked about our families. I didn't want to get him in trouble." What changed Roberto's mind was something he found along with the diary, a letter that Charlie had written but never sent. It was addressed to his daughters, and reading just the first few lines convinced Roberto that this was something that needed to see the light of day. The letter talked about how sorry he was for not being the father they deserved. Roberto recalled, his voice thick with emotion. It was clear this man was in real pain, and maybe if someone knew about it, they could help him. The letter itself became a crucial part of the story. When Chuck Lorre read it during that pivotal meeting with Charlie, it provided context for everything they'd discovered in the diary. The letter read, in part, "My beautiful girls, by the time you read this, I hope I'll have found the courage to be the man you need me to be. Right now I feel like I'm failing you every day. I watch other fathers with their children, and they seem to know exactly what they're doing. They seem confident and strong and sure of themselves. I feel like I'm fumbling in the dark, trying to figure out how to love you the way you deserve without passing on all the broken pieces of myself." The emotional weight of those words changed the entire dynamic of Charlie's relationship with the show's producers. This wasn't just about managing a difficult actor anymore. This was about helping a human being who was clearly struggling with deep-seated issues of self-worth and identity. Dr. Sarah Chun, a therapist who specializes in celebrity mental health and who was later brought in to consult on Charlie's case, explained the significance of the diary discovery. For someone like Charlie, who had built his entire public persona around being invulnerable and carefree, admitting to these kinds of struggles would have felt impossible. The diary provided a safe space for him to be honest with himself, which is often the first step in any real healing process. The impact of the diary extended beyond Charlie himself. Jon Cryer, upon learning about his co-star's secret documentation, began keeping his own journal as a way to process the complex emotions he was experiencing. I realized I'd been carrying around a lot of guilt about not seeing how much Charlie was struggling. John later wrote in his autobiography, "The diary made me understand that sometimes the people who seem the strongest are actually fighting the hardest battles." Even the show's writers were affected by the revelations. Many of them later credited the diary discovery with helping them understand their characters on a deeper level. "We thought we were writing comedy," said one writer who requested anonymity. "But Charlie's journal showed us we were actually writing about real human pain and resilience." It changed how we approached every script after that. The decision to incorporate elements of Charlie's real struggles into the show was not made lightly. The writing team spent weeks developing storylines that could address serious issues while maintaining the show's comedic tone. They consulted with mental health professionals and addiction specialists to ensure they were handling sensitive topics responsibly. One of the most powerful episodes to emerge from this process aired during the 8th season. In it, Charlie's character has a moment of clarity where he realizes that his lifestyle is hurting the people he cares about most. The episode included a scene where Charlie looks at himself in the mirror and has an honest conversation with his reflection, a direct parallel to many of the diary entries where the real Charlie examined his own behavior. The response from viewers was overwhelming. The show's fan mail, which had always been positive, took on a different tone. People began writing about their own struggles with addiction, mental health, and the pressure to maintain a facade of having everything together. The show had accidentally tapped into something universal about the human experience. "We started getting letters from people saying the show had saved their lives," recalled one of the producers. "That's when we knew we were doing something important." Charlie himself was deeply moved by the response. He began reading viewer mail for the first time in years, and many of those letters influenced his ongoing recovery process. "Knowing that my struggle could help other people gave it meaning," he later reflected. "For the first time, I felt like my pain had a purpose." The diary also revealed Charlie's complicated relationship with fame itself. Entry after entry documented his love-hate relationship with celebrity. His gratitude for his success, mixed with resentment about the loss of privacy and normalcy that came with it. "Fame is like a drug," he wrote in one particularly insightful entry. "It gives you incredible highs, but it also creates an addiction that's almost impossible to break. You start needing the attention, the validation, the constant stimulation. And then one day you wake up and realize you don't know who you are when the cameras aren't rolling." This perspective proved invaluable as Charlie worked with therapists to develop healthier coping mechanisms. Understanding that his relationship with fame was itself a form of addiction helped him approach his recovery more holistically. The transformation wasn't immediate or easy. There were setbacks and moments of doubt. Charlie struggled with the vulnerability that came with being more open about his problems. There were days when he wanted to go back to his old patterns of hiding behind humor and bravado. But the support system that had formed around him, Chuck Lorre, John Cryer, the show's cast and crew, his therapists, and even some of the fans who had reached out, helped him stay committed to the process of change. Years later, when asked about the diary and its discovery, Charlie would describe it as both the worst and best thing that ever happened to him. "It was terrifying to have my deepest secrets exposed like that," he admitted. "But it was also liberating. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't have to pretend to be someone I wasn't." The legacy of Charlie Sheen's secret diary extends far beyond one actor's personal journey. It serves as a reminder that behind every public persona is a human being dealing with real struggles, fears, and hopes. It demonstrates the power of vulnerability and the importance of creating spaces where people can be honest about their pain without fear of judgment.